Hello, Readers of the Future. I'm Endragh, and we're continuing with more Color of Magic. Last time, they escaped the temple. Hearn has joined their party for pictures, and we started talking about a Wormburg, which is a floating upside-down mountain. Okay. Start up my thing. Boop. Alright. There was also a number of cave mouths a few yards below the plateau. They had a crudely carved, regular look about them, so that on this crisp autumn morning, the Wormburg hung over the clouds like a giant dovecot. This would mean that I keep saying dove, I mean dove. Dovecote. Dovecote. This would mean that the doves had a wingspan slightly in excess of 40 yards. I knew it, said Rincewind. We're in a strong magical field. Twoflower and Hearn looked around the little hollow where they had made their noonday halt. Then they looked at each other. The horse was quietly cropping the rich grass by the stream. Yellow butterflies skittered among the bushes. There was the smell of thyme and buzzing of bees. The wild pigs on the spit sizzled gently. Hearn shrugged and went back to oiling his biceps. They gleamed. "Looks all right to me," he said. "Try tossing a coin," said Rincewind. "What?" "Go on, toss a coin." "Okay," said Hearn, "if it gives you any pleasure." He reached into his pouch and withdrew a handful of loose change, plundered from a dozen realms. With some care he selected a Zocholet-laden quarter itoem, and balanced it on a purple thumbnail. "You call," he said. "Heads or—" He inspected the observe with an air of intense concentration. "Some sort of fish with legs." "When it's in the air," said Rincewind. Hearn grinned and flicked his thumb. The iotome rose, spinning. "Edge," said Rincewind, without looking at it. Magic never dies. It merely fades away. Nowhere was this more evident on the wide blue expanse of the disk than in those areas that had been the scene of great battles of the magic wars, which had happened very shortly after creation. In those days, magic in its raw stance had been wildly available, and had been eagerly utilized by the first man in their war against the gods. The precise origins of the mage wars had been lost in the fogs of time, but disc philosophers agree that the first man, shortly after their creation, understandably lost their temper, and great and pyrotechnics were the battles that followed. The sun wheeled across the sky, the seas boiled, weird storms ravaged the land, small white pigeons mysteriously appeared in people's clothing, and the very stability of the disk, carried as it was through space on the backs of four giant turtle riding elephants, was threatened. The resultant extreme action by the old High Ones, to whom even the gods themselves are answerable. The gods were banished to high places, men were recreated a good deal smaller, and much of the old wild magic was sucked out of the earth. That did not solve the problem of those places on the disk which, during the wars, had suffered a direct hit by a spell. The magic faded away, slowly, over the millennia, releasing as it decayed myriads of sub-astral particles that severely distorted the reality around it. Rincewind, Twoflower, and Hearn stared at the coin. "Edge it is. Well, you're a wizard. So what?" "I don't do that sort of spell." "You mean you can't?" Yeah, you mean you can't. Rincewind ignored this, because it was true. "Try it again," he suggested. Hearn pulled out a fistful of coins. The first two landed in a usual manner, so did the fourth. The third landed on its edge and balanced there. The fifth turned into a small yellow caterpillar and crawled away. The sixth, upon reaching its zenith, vanished with a sharp spang. A moment later there was a small thunderclap. "Hey, that one was silver!" exclaimed Hearn, rising to his feet and staring upward. "Bring it back!" I don't know where I don't know where it'd gone, said Rincewind warily. It's probably still accelerating. The ones I tried this morning didn't come down, anyways. Hearn was still staring into the sky. What? Said Twoflower. Rincewind sighed. He had been dreading this. We've strayed into a zone with a high magical index, he said. Don't ask me how. Once upon a time, a really powerful magical field must have been generated here, and we're feeling the after effects. Precisely, said a passing bush. Hearn's head jerked down. You mean this is one of those places? He asked. Let's get out of here. Right, agreed Rincewind. If we retrace our steps, we might make it. We could stop every mile or so and toss a coin. He stood up urgently and started stuffing things into his saddlebag. What? said Twoflower. Rincewind stopped. Look, he snapped. Just don't argue. Come on. It looks all right, said Twoflower. Just a bit underpopulated, that's all. Yes, said Rincewind. Odd, isn't it? Come on. There was a noise high above them, like a strip of leather being slapped on a wet rock. Something glassy and indistinct passed over Rincewind's head, throwing up a cloud of ash from the fire, and the pig carcass took off from the spit and rocketed into the sky. It banked to avoid a cluster of trees, right itself, roared around in a tight circle, and headed hubward, leaving a trail of hot pork fat droplets. What are they doing now? Asked the old man. The young woman glanced at the scrying glass. Heading rimward at speed, she reported. By the way, they've still got that box on legs. The old man chuckled, an oddly distinct sound in the dark and dusty crypt. Sapphire Pierwood, he said. Remarkable. Yes, I think we will have that. Please see to it, my dear, before they go beyond your power, perhaps? Silence, or what, Leslie? Said the old man. In this dim light there was something odd about the way he was slumped in the stone chair. You killed me once already, remember? She snorted and stood up, tossing back her hair scornfully. It was red, fleckered with gold. Erect Leslie Wormbiter was entirely a magnificent sight. She was also almost naked, except for a couple of mere scraps of the lightest chainmail and riding boots of iridescent dragon hide. In one boot was thrust a riding crop, unusual in that it was as long as a spear and tipped with tiny steel barbs. My power will be quite sufficient, she said coldly. The indistinct figure appeared to nod, or at least to wobble. As you keep assuring me, he said. Leslie snorted, and strolled out of the hall. Her father did not bother to watch her go. One reason for this was, of course, that since he had been dead for 3 months, his eyes were in any case not in the best of conditions. The other was that as a wizard, even a dead wizard of the 15th grade, his optical nerves had long since become attuned to seeing into levels and dimensions far removed from common reality, and were therefore somewhat ineffective at observing the merely mundane. During his life they had appeared to others to be eight factual and eerily insectal. Besides, since he was now suspended in the narrow space between the living world and the dark shadow world of death, he could survey the whole casualty itself. That was why, apart from a mild hope that this time his wretched daughter would get herself killed, he did not devote his considerable powers to learning more about the 3 travelers galloping dangerously out of his realm. Several hundred yards away, Leslie was in a strange humor as she strolled down the worn steps that led into the hollow heart of the Wormburg, followed by half a dozen riders. Would this be the opportunity? Perhaps here was the key to break the deadlock, the key to the throne of Wormburg. It was rightfully hers, of course, but tradition said that only a man could rule the Wormburg. This irked Liza, Liza, and when she was angry, the power flowed stronger, and the dragons were especially big and ugly. If she had a man, things would be different. Someone who, for preference, was a big strapping lad but short on brains. Someone who would do what he was told. The biggest of the three now fleeing the dragon lands might do, and if it turned out that he wouldn't, then dragons were always hungry and needed to be fed regularly. She could see to it that they got ugly. Uglier than usual, anyways. The stairways passed through a stone arch and ended in a narrow ledge near the roof of the great cavern where the worms roosted. Sunbeams of the mirrored entrance around the walls crisscrossed the dusty gloom like amber rods in which a million golden insects had been preserved. Below they revealed nothing but a thin haze. Above, the walking rings started so close to Liza's head that she could reach up and touch one. They stretched away in their thousands across the upturned arches of the cavern roof. And it had taken a score of masons, a score of years to hammer the pythons for all those hanging from their work as they progressed. Yet they were as nothing compared to the 88 major rings that enclosed near the apex of the dome. A further 50 had been lost in the old days, as they were swung into place by teams of sweating slaves, and they had been slaves aplenty in the first days of the power. The great rings had gone crashing into the depths, dragging their unfortunate manipulators with them. But 88 had been installed, huge as rainbows, rusty as blood, from them. Yeah. The dragon sensed Liza's presence. Air swished around the cavern as 88 pairs of wings unfolded like a complicated puzzle. Great heads with green, multicolored eyes peered down at her. The beasts are still fairly transparent, while the men around her take their booklets from the while the men around her take the hook boots from the rack. Liza bends her mind to the task of full visualization. Above her in the misty air, the dragons become fully visible. Bronze scales dully reflected the sunbeam shaft. Her mind throbs, but now that the power is flowing fully, she can, with barely a wave of concentration, think of other things. Now she too buckles on the hook boots and turns a graceful cartwheel to bring her hooks, with a faint clank, against a couple of the walking rings in the ceiling. Only now it is the floor. The world has changed. Now she is standing on the edge of a deep bowl or crater, floored with the little rings across which the dragon riders are already strolling with a pendulum gait. In the center of the bowl, with their huge mounts wait amongst the herd. Far above are the distant rocks of the cavern floor, discolored by centuries of dragons dropping, moving with the ease-gliding movement that is second nature to Liza. Liza sets off towards her dragon, Lawlith, who turns his great horsey head towards her. His jowls are greasy with pork fat. It was very enjoyable, he said in her mind. I thought I said they were to be no unaccompanied flight, she snapped. I was hungry, Liza. Curb your hunger. Soon there will be horses to eat. The reins stick in our teeth. The reins of the horses stick in our teeth. Are there any warriors? We like warriors. Liza swung down the mountain ladder and lands with her legs locked around Lawless's leathery neck. The warrior is mine. There are a couple others you can have. One appears to be a wizard of sorts, she adds, by way of encouragement. Oh, you know how it is with wizards. Half an hour afterwards you could do with another one, the dragon grumbles. He spread his wings and drops. They're gaining, screamed Rincewind. He bent even lower over his horse's neck and groaned. Twoflower was trying to keep up while at the same time craning around to look at the flying beasts. You don't understand, screamed the tourist above the terrible noise of the wing beats. All my life I've wanted to see dragons. From the inside, shouted Rincewind. Shut up and ride. He whipped up his horse with the reins and stared at the woods ahead, trying to drag it closer by sheer willpower. Under those trees they'd be safe. Under those trees no dragons could fly. He heard the clap of wings before shadows folded around him. Instinctively he rolled in the saddle and felt the white-hot stab of pain as something sharp scored a line across his shoulders. Behind him Hearn screamed, but it sounded more like a bellow of rage than a cry of pain. The barbarian had vaulted down into the heather and had drawn the black sword, Cringe. He flourished it as one of the dragons curved in for another low pass. No bloody dragon does that to me, he roared. Rincewind leaned over and grabbed Twoflower's rein. Come on, he hissed. But the dragon, said Twoflower, entranced. Blast the... began the wizard, and froze. Another dragon had peeled off from the circling dots overhead, and was gliding towards them. Rincewind let go of Twoflower's horse, swore bitterly, and spurred his own mount towards the trees, alone. He didn't look back at the sudden commotion behind him, and, when a shadow passed over him, merely gibbered weakly and tried to burrow into the horse's mane. Then, instead of the searing, piercing pain he had expected, there was a series of stinging blows as the terrified animal passed under the eaves of the wood. The wizard tried to hang on, but another low branch, stoutier than the others, knocked him out of the saddle. The last thing he had heard before the flashing blue light of unconsciousness closed in was a high reptile scream of frustration and the thrashing of talons in the treetops. Okay. When he awoke, a dragon was watching him. At least, it was staring in his general direction. Rincewind groaned and tried to dig his way into the moss with his shoulder blades, then gasped as the pain hit him. Through the mist of agony and fear, he looked back at the dragon. The creature was hanging from a branch of a large dead oak tree, several hundred feet above. Its bronzy golden rings were tightly wrapped around its body, but the long equestrian head turned this way and that at the end of a remarkable, prehensible neck. It was scanning the forest. It was also semi-transparent. Although the sun was glinting off its scales, Rincewind could clearly make out the outlines of the branches behind it. On one of them, a man was sitting, dwarfed by the hanging reptile. He appeared to be naked except for a pair of high boots, a tiny leather holdall in the region of his groin, and high crest helmet. He was swinging a short sword back and forth idly, and stared out across the treetops with the air of one carrying out a tedious and unglamorous assignment. A beetle began to crawl laboriously up Rincewind's leg. The wizard wondered how much damage a half-solid dragon could do. Would it only half kill him? He decided not to stay and find out. Moving on heels, fingertips, and shoulder muscles, Rincewind wiggled sideways until foliage masked the oak and its occupants. Then he scrambled to his feet and hurried off between the trees. He had no destination in mind, no provisions, and no horse, but while he still had legs he could run. Ferns and brambles whipped at him, but he didn't feel them at all. When he had put about a mile between him and the dragon, he stopped, and collapsed against a tree, which then spoke to him. Psst, it said. Dreading what he might see, Rincewind let his gaze slide upwards. It tried to fasten on incurious bits of bark and leaf, but the source of curiosity forced it to leave them behind. Finally, it fixed on a black sword thrust straight through the branches above Rincewind's head. "Don't just stand there," said the sword, in a voice like the sound of fingers dragged across the rim of a large empty wine-glass. "Pull me out." "What?" said Rincewind, his chest still heaving. "Pull me out," repeated Cringe. "It's either that, or I'll be spending the next 1,000,000 years in a coal measure." "Yeah. Did I ever tell you about the time I was thrown into the lake up in the—" "What happened to the others?" said Rincewind, still clutching the tree desperately. "Oh, the dragons got them, and the horses, and the box thing. Me too, except then Hearn dropped me. What a stroke of luck for you!" "Well," began Rincewind, Pring ignored him. "I expect you'll be in a hurry to rescue them," it added. "Yes, well, so if you'll just pull me out, we can be off." Rincewind squinted up at the sword. A rescue attempt had hither been so far at the back of his mind that, if some advanced speculation on the nature and shape of the many-dimensional multiplex of the universe were correct, it was right at the front. But a magic sword was a valuable item, and it would be a long trek back home, wherever that was. He scrambled up the tree and inched along the branch. Cringe was buried very firmly in the wood. He gripped the pommel and heaved until lights flashed in front of his eyes. "Try again," said the sword encouragingly. Rincewind groaned and grit his teeth. "Could be worse," said Cringe. "This could have been an anvil." "Yarg!" hissed the wizard, fearing for the future of his groin. Oh, okay. Sorry, that's a good enough stop. So, dragons. They half exist. They're transparent, semi-transparent, not fully transparent. So, interesting. We'll find out more about them the next chapter. It's pretty much all of the next chapter, I think. No, there's a little bit more. So it's the next chapter, which will be tomorrow night. So I've been Endragh. This has been The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. I hope it brought a smile to your face, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Night-night, guys.